J.M. Another story from the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 6. Home. In a corner of the countryside, sinking into a silver world of snow, a Gothic architecture suddenly appears. The Garrett mansion, nestled in the snow-covered forest, boasted a dignified presence befitting its lineage. Although I had spent more time at boarding school since elementary school, the time spent at this ancestral land was already longer than the time spent at school. Nottingham, where I spent my childhood and returned to during long holidays, was my hometown. The Garrett family estate, with a history of several hundred years, was vast, and under the protection of the current Earl, my father, hundreds of tenants lived within the estate. There was something reminiscent of the old feudal society among them. While most of the tenants were farmers, there were also those who worked as blacksmiths or carpenters. Some were engaged in trade outside the estate, but almost all the necessities of daily life could be obtained within the estate. My father served as the coordinator of the economic activities within the estate. The role of a noble landlord must have changed with the times. The tenants enjoyed a prosperous life befitting their respective classes, and my father received the appropriate respect and loyalty as the lord of the land. It had been a long time since the four of us in the family had gathered together. After dinner, it was a tradition in our house to move to the living room and gather around the fireplace for a cozy time. Having returned from the cramped dormitory life to the comfortable home, I felt completely relaxed. In a friendly atmosphere, the conversation turned to my future after graduating from Hamilton. With the hope of being a modest Christmas present to my family, I expressed my wishes. "Oxford is out of the question," was my father's response. I had not expected to be opposed, and for a moment, I lost color in my face. Attending the venerable University of Oxford, the oldest institution in the British Empire and a world-renowned center of learning, is an unparalleled honor for both the student and their family. Why should that be a problem? There is no room for debate on this decision. If you intend to go against it, you will receive no support for tuition or any other matters. I felt a surge of indignation at my father's blunt reply. All the assets of the Garrett family are managed by my father. Through an inheritance from my late grandfather, I have been allocated some assets, but I cannot touch them without my father's permission as my legal guardian. In other words, until I reach adulthood, I have no assets that I can freely access. Why is it not allowed? I knew my father was not the type to go back on his word. However, I was not going to back down either. Why not? I cannot accept being opposed without being given a reason. Father pursed his lips into a thin line and fell silent. A heavy silence descended between the family members who had just been chatting amiably moments before. "Darling." My mother, unable to bear the silence, gently placed her hand on my father's arm. But she said no more. Understandably so. Unless there are financial reasons, where can one find parents who oppose their son's desire to study at Oxford? "Why do you want to go to Oxford?" Father's tone after the silence was heavy. "That is..." I faltered in my words. It's not that I hadn't prepared an answer. It's just that, faced with unexpected opposition, I couldn't immediately think of words to persuade my father. "What do you intend to study at Oxford?" "I want to study philosophy." I answered as I had thought. "Philosophy? And how does that serve any purpose in the real world?" Father said, almost spitting out the words. "Philosophy is the pursuit of knowledge in all academic fields. It is the foundation of learning and the ultimate destination of all disciplines." My choice of studying philosophy as a research field was influenced by several meetings with professors. I became interested in discussing and deepening my thoughts on problems that had no definitive answers, as well as problems with different answers depending on the individual. "What significance does that have?" Father insisted on that point. Studying things is what universities are for, aren't they? That's right. But subjects like philosophy are of no use in the practical world. Do you intend to become a university professor? To be honest, I hadn't thought that far ahead. To remain at university and dedicate my life to scholarship. Like a professor. As a life choice, it wasn't bad. However, at that time, it was a story of an unimaginable future for me. It was not something that could be decided on the spot. My father, Samuel Garrett, was not only the head of the Earls family but also the owner of a small newspaper company in London that he had started with his own capital. Although it was still a fledgling newspaper company and not yet profitable, it was gradually increasing its circulation, and my father, who also wrote articles alongside managing it, usually lived in London. He studied law during his university days. Father, who stood in the world with his own power rather than relying on his status as an earl, took pride in his way of life. Therefore, my indecisive attitude must have been even more frustrating to him. What is a philosopher? Father asked me, who? Couldn't say anything in response. A kind of person who just rolls around useless thoughts in their head, isn't it? They are of no use to society once they step out into the world. But many philosophers who have carved their names in history exist. Socrates, Plato, Diogenes. Diogenes was nothing more than a beggar. Alexander the Great sought his advice. Great thinkers live in their heads. They refine their thoughts in their heads. What use is that? Are you saying you want to become a beggar? Philosophy is considered the most noble of all studies at university. Are you opposed to studying it? Father fell into thought at this question. No, it seems we've veered off track a bit. I have no intention of criticizing what you want to do. But Oxford is out of the question. In the end, my father never nodded in agreement. I thought about mentioning the professor to him, but I stopped myself. It was a promise not to mention his name. If I broke it, my enrollment at Oxford could be completely off the table. I became curious if my father knew the professor. There was no way to confirm it since I couldn't mention his name, but the professor had said that he had once been under my father's care. If that were the reason my father opposed my Oxford enrollment, what kind of past did they have? Did the professor help me get into university for my sake because he felt indebted to my father? Does my father have negative feelings toward the professor? Even if he did, could resentment toward one individual be enough reason to block my Oxford enrollment? A new question sprouted in my mind. The discussion about my future never came up again, and the Christmas holiday ended.